Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to take a look at something that I've not done on this channel before but hopefully we'll be doing more of in the future, and that is a tier list. Now of course, as per usual, in the description below there will be the usual timestamps relevant to the card's typing, so supporter, if it's a fire type, water type, that sort of thing. There will also be a timestamp if you just want to jump ahead to the end of the video, because I know some of you will, so that'll be there as well if you wish to do so. So of course we're going to be talking about the cards from the Pitch Black set that will at least have some degree of use, if it will make a meta impact, if it will just, see like locals play, that sort of thing. If it's something like, a really obscure card that will probably never see the light of day, it's not on this tier list. I'm only talking about cards that will at least make some degree of an impact, at least to some degree. But of course, if you want to look at supporter cards, the 1 item card, 2 tools, the 2 special energy, or, you want to skip ahead to a certain type of Pokemon, feel free to do so using the timestamps in the description below. Of course, these opinions are my own. I'm happy to discuss my opinions in the comments below, so feel free to do that. But without further ado, let's get cracking with the grass types. And first of all, let's start off with the Poltergeist. I nearly said Sinister when I did my first attempt to record this video. And it's easily an A tier card. The reason why I say that is because the Sinister EX deck has a huge buff now, because obviously this cannot die to a Monkey Dory. This also can't die to a Dragapult, which is really good, and is, really nice to have. The attack of it is not really relevant, and to be honest, it probably won't be. But the fact that it also has free retreat as well is just really good, and has a huge amount of benefit. There's a deck I've been working on, which is Sinister EX with Yanmega EX, with Teal Mask Gogopons as well. And honestly, this is going to really help that deck, because obviously originally we had the Poltergeist with the, I know it's immune to effects of attacks, but it's not immune to abilities, so you could Monkey Dory it. And that's where this Hide and Sneak one will benefit from that. So it's a good buff to the deck, and to be honest, I'm happy with this card. Then, of course, we have the Sinister, which I don't know how to feel about this card, I'll be brutally honest, so I'm going to plonk it in B. The reason why I say that is because Matcha Spin is decent, but like I said, if you're going to lean into the Sinister, you're probably leaning into the Spiritomb, and the Spiritomb version, from what I've seen, a little bit clunky, and that's being polite about it. The issue is you need 13, I believe it is, for Spiritomb, and it's a lot to ask for, but also, that means you're going to have to be spreading damage with the Sinisters, the Spiritomb obviously needs a lot of setup, it just feels a lot less, consistent in what it wants to do, and I just think the Delmise version is just infinitely better, because if you put a little Scafaria in the list, which in my version I play 2, you're just farming Dragapults and Lucarios, so I think that's the best way to go forward with it. Then we have Lurantis EX, which, unfortunately, as I think it is a funny card, it's going to have to go in C tier. It's a high C tier card is what I'm trying to say here. It's an okay card, you can lean into the Leaf Guard attack, which does 140, and then you take 50 less, so effectively, Lurantis has 310 HP. The issue is with that is probably the most common Pult variant you're going to run into now is going to be Pult Blaziken, which, spoiler alert, even with the damage reduction, it still one-shots this. The first attack, Lively Cutter, is interesting, and I do need to do a video on this card, but it's a bit awkward to set up because Monkey Dory doesn't heal, it just moves damage counters, so that's one thing to consider. But obviously doing 260 for 1 grass energy is pretty good. I would probably say if you want to have this card work is play Hero Escape as your ace spec like I'm doing for my future video, and lean into Leaf Guard as your primary attack, which, yeah, it's not a great attack, but you can still play Monkey Dories to, offset some of the damage, and then you can play things like, the Shuckle, which does, well, it heals 20 from a grass Pokemon, all your Pokemon, sorry, if it has a grass attached. And then, of course, you can still play Monkey Dories to improve that damage output. So, there is a world in which this card works, but I think it's just a bit too awkward, and I don't think it's going to really make an impact. Then we have the Armor Rouge, which I must admit, I'm kind of looking forward to making a video on this card, but again, this is a C tier card. So this does 40 plus 40 for each of your bench Pokemon that have a fire energy attached. Now, in an ideal world, you'd want to play this deck as a pure single prize, because if you had, of course, 8 bench Pokemon down with a fire attached, that's 320 damage, which for 1 fire energy on a single prizer, that's pretty good. The only issue with that is the best way to get fire energy into play right now is if you play Quarry EX with a Pyro or, a Camerupt or anything like that. Mega Charizard as well if you want to go that route. The issue is with that is you're basically turning a single prize archetype into a 3-prize archetype with a single prize attacker. Which, yeah, that's alright to have, but I don't know how to feel about that because, Mega Charizard X would want to discard that energy, which means your Armor's damage is nerfed. Mega Charizard Y is, it's a good bench sniper, but Shaman is seeming a lot more play right now, so, not really the best thing to think about. And lastly, you would have to, split your energy attachments across your entire bench and play a Terror that you can attach a fire to. So the only one that comes to mind is Half-Flame Mascogapon, and no one wants to play that card. And, you could just, instead of going, putting it on a Half-Flame, you could just, play a Cornerstone or something and just attach Return to the Cornerstone. But if you don't have an attachment on your Armor Rouge, you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. So I think, again, like Lurantis, this card has some value, but I think it's just a little bit too awkward to work around. Then we have Mega Delphox EX, which I'm putting it in B tier. The reason for this is, whilst it is not as good as these cards, I don't think, the Trick Portal attack does have some pretty good use. You can play Chorus's Tenacity as your ace, well, not ace spec, the Grand Tree is your ace spec, and you can play a high counter Chorus to find it. The reason why I think it's better than the Lurantis and the Armor Rouge is purely because, it can just fart out any Pokemon it wants from the top 9 cards of the deck. Now, of course, Tatsugiri EX is just better for this, but, of course, that takes 3 energy and requires a specific ace spec to make use of that. Delphox can do it for 1 energy, and is a lot more consistent in getting said energy. Delphox as well can play Aurorus, and that will give it 50 more resistance to damage, which is already pretty good, because it's 350 HP. So, there's that value as well. It can be very bulky if you want to make it that way. Alternatively, you could just go, full toxic and just play a 4-2-4 Dusknoir line, like what I'm planning to do. So, there's a few ways in which you can build it. Then, of course, the second attack, Eerie Glow for 200 for a fire and 2 colorless. Your opponent's Pokemon is burned and confused. Not bad, but, like I said, a lot of, special effect, like, Mist Energy, Rocky Energy, Bubbly Energy, there's a lot more healing, there's a lot more switch outs, so, that attack does lose a bit of its value. But when you pair it with a Dusknoir, you're still doing 330 damage, which is pretty good, and that's decent to me at least. So I think Delphox does have some potential, but I don't think it's going to be top dog. Then we come to a card I am very excited to make a video on, which is Wailord, and I'm putting it in high B tier. Main reason is because this card is just such a meme. I mean, it's stage 1, 380 HP. Unfortunately, we won't be able to play Hero's Cape or Max Spell with it because, well, when it's knocked out, we've got to reset another Wailord, which is going to be quite tough. But you can still play, healing cards. You can play Secret Box as your ace spec, which I'm pretty sure everyone is doing. And you get to play Bubbly Energy to counter, Darkrai, which I'm not really worried about Darkrai, I must admit. The only thing that I think Wailord would need, outside of Munkidori's, is damage mods of some degree. Would be pretty nice. You could play Gravity Mountain to, help that. Then you can play Munkidori's to help with that as well. I'm not finished with my build yet. I don't have a huge amount of confidence with my build. It's still in the oven, but I'm really looking forward to playing this card. It's one of those cards that just, it's funny, and, it would be funny to just see it in action. Then we have this single prize Palafin, which the only reason I'm putting it in here is because I've seen it in 1 or 2 Palafin lists, and well, I thought I'd feature it in this video. Essentially, if your opponent has 1 prize remaining, this attack does 200 more damage, so it's 280 on a single prizer. The issue is Palafin primarily is a 2-prize attacking archetype, so you're never really going to hit that, 1 prize sort of situation. The only way in which you would is if, of course, you're playing Mega Greninja and your opponent takes out one Palafin and one Greninja, which is when this can come into play. However, what holds it back is, these decks don't play a huge amount of energy. I think they play like 8. And 2 of them needs to go on as Palafin. If this was a 1 energy attack, it would probably be in C tier. But because it's a 2 and it's just a bit, it's a bit much to, set up in the long run when it comes to late game. Because, if you're benching a Finizen with just 70 HP in the late game, you're asking for a boss's orders for game, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, this card is not worth building around, in my opinion. That's how I see it. Next, we have Primarina, which I am going to put it in C tier. This, I think, in theory, was supposed to work with the Whale Lord. I'm not really sure. But, Primarina's an interesting card anyway. There is a world in which this card could be useful in a Whale Lord deck. I think my original build did have it had a 2/1/2 line of Primarina for healing. And, of course, you can use the attack Aqua Return, which does 120 and shuffles everything back into the deck. So, it has use. But I don't think this card is, great. And it's only really good for healing. The attack is okay. But, that means you're going to rebench, all the... Is it Poplio? I don't remember the starters from Sun and Moon, so forgive me. I picked Litten. I'm sure everyone else did. But, I'm a fire-type lover. What can I say? But yeah, this card I just don't think we'll see any play. Then we have the Relicanth, which, it's a bit better than the Palafin, at least to set up, but this is a D-tier card. Essentially, this is a fossil beatdown attack. So the most you can have is 5 down on your bench, so you're doing 160 damage. You can play Brave Bangles to obviously increase your damage. If you really wanted to go a funky route, you could play Cornerstones and Area Zero, but the issue is you have to play the Fossil Stadium to find said fossil cards, so it makes it a bit more awkward, and that's what makes this card just terrible. But, in the grand scheme of things, 190 for a single energy, and you can play Legacy Energy, you can play Lana's Aid to recover the Relicanths. I don't think this is too bad. And you can also play Larry's Skill, which is a goated supporter and doesn't see enough play. But sadly, this card just isn't great. But, it's funny, but I just don't think it's that great. Then we have the Sea King, which is basically Huntail Gorbis, but it can bench snipe. The issue is, however, this card would need a lot to get it going. So I'm going to put it just in front of the Palafin in D tier. The issue is, like I said, the Huntail Gorbis, the Gorbis attaches as much energy as you can from your hand to it before it attacks. This Sea King doesn't do that. There's not really a definitive way to get the Sea King going outside of playing Misty for turn, and then you're doing 120 benched damage, which is not bad, but, at that point you then lose the water energy, and yeah, it's a bit of a faff, and I don't think this card will ever see play, personally anyway. It might pop up in Expanded. It could be useful there, but in the standard format, I don't think so. Then we have the Slowpoke, which is going in A tier. This is actually a buff for Slowking, because you don't have to play Pokepads all the time now. You can actually play some Buddy Poffins, so you can actually find, a Dunsparce engine if you wanted to. And you have the best attack in the game, which is all you can yeet. Which we all love a yeet attack, that's for sure. Essentially, you just discard until you don't want to discard anymore. That's pretty much what it does. But no, I think this is a huge buff for Slowking, because obviously Slowking has relied on a Kangaskhan Latias engine with Fez, which, again, it's like the Armor Rouge I was on about earlier. It's very much like saying you're turning a single prize archetype into a 3 and 2 prize archetype, which you don't really want to do. Slowking can make up for that because it can cure him, and play Annihilate and stuff like that. But yeah, I think this could definitely open the door to Slowking getting a Dunsparce engine, even a Dracloak engine would be spicy, because you could in theory play Crispin, play a couple of fire, and play a Pult, which would be hilarious. But there's a world in which that works, and I think this card here allows you to do that. Next, we have a card which... Would it have been out by now on my channel? I think so. I think it would have been Wednesday's video. Possibly tomorrow's... Well, it would be Saturday's video, this will probably be. Depends on how it works and everything. And we have All Out Slowbro, which I'm going to put in front of the Primarina. All Out Slowbro, I played well, I recently recorded for a video. I had a blast with it. It's not a very good card. I'm going to say that straight off the bat. You do, in my opinion, need to play Ignition Energy just so you can Zen Headbutt for 110 and, combine it to damage and stuff. But honestly, I had a blast with this card. It's not a great card, for like the fact that you have to play down your hand to nothing. But, it's fun. You get to play a Festival Lead engine with a Swirlix and the Thwackies, so that can help it, but it is a bit awkward to set up. And of course, trying to, play consistently and obviously sequencing to get your hand down to 0 can be quite awkward if you're not used to it. But honestly, I think this is going to be a pretty funny card to just pop up at a locals with and just have a blast. Speaking of a blast, because it's essentially a deluxe bomb in disguise, we have Mega Slowbro, which I'm going to plonk right up here next to Whale Lord. This card I'm still in the process of, experimenting with. I think it's actually pretty okay. Like, yeah, you could be, like, next level douchebaggery and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to play Deluxe Bomb as my ace spec. Because if you don't know what Shellnado Spin does, it does 180 damage for 3 psychic, and then if your opponent hits into the Slowbro, they take 12 damage counters. So essentially, if you paired it with the Deluxe Bomb, they'd be taking 240, so you've essentially done 420 damage, which is hilarious. But I don't think that's the way you should go with it. Honestly, I think, just playing Monkey Dories to help with healing and stuff like that would be more than adequate. And, you can play Jumbo Ice Creams to obviously heal the Slowbro. I think this card's got some good value in it, but I don't think it's going to be like, top of, I don't think it's going to be the top sort of like tier, but it is definitely something. Next, we have the Litwick, Lampant, and Chandelure, or the Mega Chandelure. The Mega Chandelure I'll talk about afterwards, but as much as I love these cards, they're going in B tier. I do think the Lampant has a bit more value than the Litwick. The Litwick enables you to play, the Frostas Chandelure deck with a 70 HP basic, which is pretty good, so I do like that. But the Lampant is absolutely cracks. Essentially, this is Mirage Step on a Lampant, and it's pretty good. If you don't know Mirage Step Curlier, it was good in God of War, and was busted in God of War. And this essentially does that, so you can, for 1 psychic energy, you could just fart out 3 more Lampants if you got them in the deck. Pretty nice to have. Yeah, what more can I really say? There's not much to talk about with these cards, because we know they're cracked, Then we come to Mega Chandelure, which I'm going to put it behind the Lampant and stuff like that. It is a decent card, but I think it's just got a bit, it's got a lot going for it, but with Latias and, switch cards in the format, it does lose a little bit of its value. And, with Latias in the format, if you're facing a big basic deck, that's going to make things very tricky. Unless you're focusing down the Latias, like, consistently, this card against big basic decks is going to suck. But, you do get to play a decent single prizer, which we'll talk about in a second. So, it does have some value, but personally I think Mega Chandelure belongs here. Then we have the Mars Shadow, which I'm going to plonk just in front of the Flame Legion Armourouge. Essentially, this does 30 damage for each of your opponent's colorless retreat cost in its retreat cost. And obviously you're meant to play it with the Chandelure. So, for a single prizer, this isn't bad. And it does give Chandelure an answer to Crustle outside of, the other Chandelure, the fire type. But I don't think it's as good as that. But, I'll probably play 1 copy in my list just so I have it, I guess. Then we have Bayonet, which I'm going to put just behind the Armourouge. It's a good card, it does have, a decent attack. Puppet Pull for 18, and you can grab any card you want. And it has Hide and Sneak, so it essentially says, screw you to Dragon Pull, which is nice. We all love to see that. Then we come to Spiritomb, and it's going right at the back of C tier. Again, like I mentioned at the start, near to the start of this video, this card is very cool, and it has a major, damage mod when it comes to, damage counters and stuff if you play with the Sinisters. But it's just way too inconsistent to get it going, It's a very inconsistent deck from what I've seen, but that's just my take, I've probably not seen the best builds, I don't know, it's still too early to know, but personally I think Spiritomb, it needs to stay behind in my opinion. Then we come to Delmise, which is going to be our first S tier card because, well, it's Delmise. Now, of course, in my Hide and Sneak video, I said that the archetype is, it's decent, but it does have some matchups it will struggle into. But, outside of the pitch black cards, we are at the point where we're going to be having 3 S tier cards in a row, spoiler alert. But, yeah, this Delmise is absolutely great because it's basically Okie Dokie, but better, because Okie Dokie takes a lot more setup. You need to play Barbaricles, that sort of thing. Delmise doesn't care about any of that. You can just force out, other Delmise with telepathic psychic energy. Delmise is infinitely better than Okie Dokie, at least in my opinion right now. Then we come to the metal Pokemon with Mega Excadrill, and like I just said, I think this card is top tier. The reason why I think that is because whilst Pork Chicken will see more play, which is kind of a shame for this card, but the fact that it can, trade up into a lot of the archetypes in the meta right now, that's pretty good to have. Now, of course, you can play damage mods, you can play maximum belt if you really wanted to. I don't think you need it, personally. You can play Black Belt's Training, which, you can find. I think this card's got a lot of potential because it gives Matang Box such a hard-hitting attacker that doesn't discard the energy like the Heatran does. This card is easily going to be one of our best. And then, of course, we come to the Bastiodon, which, spoiler alert, this is also a card I think we'll see a lot of play. I'm probably not going to use this card myself. I don't particularly like these sort of, controlling cards, if that makes sense. I'm not a big fan of them. But in terms of the meta, this card is going to see a lot of play, and I really do think it will. Now, of course, a lot of decks that feature Bastiodon are going to be playing, the new magnetic, or the relatively new magnetic metal energy, which is pretty good. It's a pretty decent energy and everything. It gives this thing no retreat cost. I think it's a 4 retreat cost on this. But, of course, they will still play Switch in case they prize the magnetic energy. So, there is a lot to think about, but honestly, this card just shuts down a lot of the big slot box dexes, and I'm happy with that. It can even attack, which, yeah, it's not a great attack, it does 160, but, if you're facing a Clefairy deck and you're playing Rampardos and just, switching into, Bastiodon after discarding a few energy, it's not bad at all, it's got a lot of versatility. Now, do I think the Iron Thorns version is worth playing? No, because I don't think, Iron Thorns makes a big enough impact these days. But that's just my take. Now, moving on to the Dark cards, because one of them will be coming up in a future series of mine, which I should hopefully be able to get recorded the week when this video goes out. First off, we have Chi-Yu, which is going straight into A tier. Toxbox was very much a card or a deck archetype that really struggled in the opening stages. This fixes that massively. This does 110 damage for just, for a single energy. And it's kind of busted. It's a really good card. Now, it doesn't do weakness, so that is something to bear in mind. It's not like Moltres. But the fact that it's an early pressure attacker that can just infinitely get going is so good for the archetype. I'd argue Toxbox could even play 2 of these and not have an issue. The fact that Toxbox doesn't have to sit around, waiting for Monkey Dories to come online, for the Brute Bonnets and stuff, your Absols and things like that, makes this awesome. I really do think this card will have an impact in terms of Toxbox. In terms of the meta, probably not, but that's just my take on it. Next, we come to a card which I'm surprised I didn't get any hate for it. We have Mega Darkrai, which unfortunately is going to have to go somewhere in between, the Slowbro and the Bayonet. This card on paper seems pretty cracked, a decent first attack which can do 220, which, deals with a lot of, the basic EX Pokemon, hits Chandelier for weakness, that sort of thing. But outside of that, Abyss Eye is a great, attack and everything, but there's just so much against this card. You've got Rocky Fighting Energy, you've got Mist Energy, you've got Bubbly Energy. There's some Pokemon that are immune to the effects of attacks anyway, looking at you, Team Rocket Articuno, but you can just Dark Raid that, so I guess it's not that big of a deal. But in my opinion, I think Darkrai is just not a great card and shouldn't really be played, in my opinion. But, it is one of those where, it is capable of doing something, but I don't think it's something we'll be, losing sleep over. Then we come to the Thievel, which I'm going to put just behind Darkrai but in front of Slowbro. This is a card that I'm surprised no one's really talked about, because obviously we all talked about Slowbro, but this actually has a pretty good attack as well. This essentially, if you have no cards in your hand, just like Slowbro, can copy any of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks, which, that's not bad, actually. That's actually pretty good. You could even go the horrible route if their opponent is playing Darkrai and slip a couple of Dark Bell in your deck. Now, I'm playing a Diplin Festival Lead variant with a couple of Ignition Energy for the Thievel, which I'll be doing a video on at some point for my new series that I'm planning. But yeah, I think this does have some value because Dark is actually not a bad typing. You know, it's not like amazing typing, but you know, the fact that it can copy any attack on your opponent's active Pokemon for just an Ignition Energy or attaching 2 energy to it, that's pretty good as far as I'm concerned. It's definitely a card that I think will have some impact, but like All Out Slowbro, it will more be a rogue archetype in my opinion. Then we come to Morpeko EX. And as much as I love this card, it's going to have to go in D tier, I'm afraid. As funny as this card is, because you get to play Center Scorch, you get to play Diggersby as well. You know, if you want to go that route for a bit of extra damage. To put it simply, this card is terrible. So it has 180 HP, and its attack requires you to have more damage counters on it to do more damage. So it does 40 base, and it's 40 more for each damage counter on it. So in order to do any meaningful damage, you need to attack with a Center Scorch or a Diggersby twice. Which, as you can imagine, that puts you at 120 HP for a 2-prizer. Yeah, that's not great. I do think this will be a funny card to build around, but this card is shocking. There's no polite way of putting it. Then we come to a little friend over here, which is relevant to the Excadrill, but also, you know, technically Excadrill EX, which I really want to make that card work again, but I don't think I'm going to. The Drillbur can easily sit right in B tier. It has Call for Family, so it's really good in this deck in case you start whiffing. And it's 2 basic Pokemon, so again, it's pretty good. And, you know, it has an attack that isn't, you know, too relevant, but, you know, 50 damage for 3 energy when you can just, you know, deal with a Badoo. You know, if you can't find your Excadrills, but you manage to find your Metangs, you know, that sort of thing. It's not bad, you know, it's workable, but it's not the reason why we would use this card. But the fact that we get to play a 70 HP Drillbur with, you know, Call for Family in a deck that, you know, sometimes struggles with consistency and can prize its precious trolley, not bad at all. I think this is pretty good. Then we come to Rampardos, which, I'm not sure how I feel about this card, but I'm going to slap it just in front of Lampent. I don't think it's going to be as good as Lampent in the long run, but it does have some good things going about it. You compare it with Bastiodon, which is pretty good, because obviously this thing is pretty decently bulky as well. Its attack is pretty decent as well. It's 150 for 2 fighting, and it does 150 more on the next turn if it doesn't get moved out of the active, that is. So again, that's not bad at all. But also, it's an inbuilt Crushing Hammer, which is actually pretty alright, and, you know, it does have its value there. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, I think the Lampent will probably see more impact than this will. Not this Lampent with this card. I don't think Mega Chandelure is going to really make use of this. I think single prize Chandelure will probably play a couple of Psychic just so it can fart out Lampents easier. But, you know, it's something to think about, you know. But this being an inbuilt Crushing Hammer with the Bastiodon, and you can play Crushing Hammers if you want, is kind of cracked, and I'm here for it. It's pretty nice. Then we come to Silvally, which is, or Silvally, whatever you want to call it. And again, I'm going to slap it with the 2 that require no cards in hand, because this lets you grab a supporter card. So this lets you grab a supporter card we'll talk about later, which is Gladion. So that's pretty good. You know, there is a lot of merit in that regard. But, you know, there is something to think about when it comes to that, because obviously this card it's actually okay, and it can make use of the Ignition Energy that we've talked about earlier for the Slowbro, same with the Thievel. So it can attack as well. It does have some versatility. But getting to just grab a supporter card that you want, if, you know, I believe it's if you have no cards in hand, similar to the Slowbro, that lets you grab a Hilda, which you already play a 4 count of in these decks anyway. So, again, that's pretty good to have. And honestly, I think it's a pretty good card. Then we come to Tukinen. It's going in. I'm taking the piss. Don't worry. I'm not going to slap this card in D tier. This is an awesome card. This is a really good card, and I'm so glad that we got another Rondo-like attacker. But it's one that just, this card can go into pretty much any deck, and it will not have an issue, because it's a colorless attacker, it's inbuilt draw, and you just have so much versatility with it. So, of course, its attack is exactly the same as Palkia V-Stars, which is 60 plus 20 for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon and your bench Pokemon. So, this card could go into Terra Box, this card could go into Slot Box, like what I've done. This card could go into Alakazam, and is doing well in Alakazam. There's so much versatility with this card, and honestly, I think this is going to be one of the most impactful cards of the set, and that's not me sugarcoating it, that's just me being honest. Next, we come to the Vikavolt, well, Vikavolt, whatever you want to call it. I'm calling it Vikavolt, Vikavolt, whatever. Honestly, I think this card is okay. It's not great in the grand scheme of things, but I'm going to put it in front, if, this would let me, in front of Lurantis. This second attack is 260, but if it doesn't have any Voltaic Lightning energy on it, it does nothing. So, you technically only get 4 chances to attack if, you're getting knocked out and stuff. But you can play other lightning attackers like Mega Manectric, you can play Mega Electros, you can play, single prize, you can play double prize, you can play Zekrom, that sort of thing. You can even play the new Zeraora if you want in that, archetype. It's alright, but I don't think this card's going to see much play. Then we come to the single prize Manectric, and it's going up in A tier. Now, this might seem like a bit of a controversial pick, but I'm more on about the first attack. So obviously, as we know, Mega Manectric has the first attack of Flash Ray, which stops all basic Pokemon. This has a similar attack, but does it for evolutions. That's pretty good, and, not a lot of decks are going to be attacking with their basic Pokemon. For example, Dreepy will highly unlikely be attacking. Bidoof will obviously be doing their stuff, but, that's just standard. The fact that this walls completely evolution Pokemon, this is actually pretty good for the archetype, and definitely gives Mega Manectric a buff that I think it kind of needed. But anyway, that's my take on it. Then we come to Mega Zeraora, which I'm going to slap it just in front of the Lampent. This card has a lot of ways of being built around. You could pair it with Mega Manectric and Eels if you wanted. You could just play Eels and just, play into the Zeraora. Or you could do what I would say trying to do, because I keep running into single prizes. And that is pairing it with Iono's Belly Bolt and playing a Scramble Switch. So far it's not been going well because I keep running into single prizes, but we'll gloss over that. It's a decent card, it does get the job done, but I don't think it's going to see the impact that we think. Then we come to Misty's Vitality, which is essentially the same as I think it was Kiawe, which does it for fire energy. But obviously it ends your turn. Not a bad card, and I think paired with Wailord, which is its best partner, this isn't a bad card. It thins the deck of 4 energy. Yes, it ends your turn, but you can just slap it on a Wailmer and just sit there and laugh your head off as your opponent goes, oh bugger, I've got to deal with a massive whale. Now, of course, I don't think Misty's Vitality is going to be seen in really any other deck. I just don't think it will. But honestly, it's a pretty okay card. I don't think it's going to be seen outside of Wailord, that's just my opinion, but that's my take on it. Then we have Gwyn. Gwyn is a really good draw supporter for the Hide and Sneak archetype, but that's all really it's for, in my opinion. So I'm going to slap Gwyn in C for now. I'll probably change this ranking as I go, I'll probably change this ranking in the future if you ask me in the future, because you never know, we might have a Pokemon archetype that, likes cards in the discard pile, outside of Hide and Sneak. We used to have, I think it was a Houndstone. I don't know if it's still in the format, I don't think it is. A Houndstone EX that I think it did 10 more damage for each Psychic Pokemon in your discard pile, so you paired it with Dusknoir, basically. Gwyn would definitely be a good card if that was still around, but outside of, Hide and Sneak, this card probably won't be seen too much. Then we have a card which I'm certain that every Slowbro, Thievel, and of course Festival League player is very happy to see, and that is Gladion, which is easily going in A tier. This essentially, if you have no cards in your hand, lets you do 80 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon that has a rule box. With your non-rule box Pokemon, of course. Essentially, this makes Festival Leave, without any other damage mods, doing 180 damage. I'll let that sink in a minute, because you can two-shot pretty much anything in the format. Which, the only thing you're not two-shotting is a Mega Venusaur, and you can just grab a Brave Bangle for that. This gives Festival Lead a humongous buff, as far as I'm concerned. Same with the Slowbro, same with the Thievul. This is an insane card for this archetype. Now we come to a card which I think will probably be, something you can tech into, Rampardos and Bastiodon. We have Team Executive, I can't remember the team it is, but essentially if one of your Pokemon was knocked out by an attack, it discards an energy from your opponent's Pokemon. Yeah, outside of controlling archetypes, this will not see play. In terms of, control archetypes, it will probably be up in A tier because it is a pretty good support to have. But for now, it's going to go in D tier. I don't really see a reason to, play this card outside of a control deck. And to be fair, from what I've seen in online tournaments, control decks have dropped off the face of the earth, which is always good to see. Then we come to our one item card of the set, which is Dark Bell. Dark Bell is actually seeing play outside of Dark decks. It's mainly Mega Starmie that's playing this. And to be honest, I think it's a pretty good C tier card. I'm going to slap it just in front of Rampardos. I think, honestly, this is not a bad card. It's pretty okay, but, it's more for Dark decks, because obviously Dark decks can just make you go confused, which is, something nice and everything. But outside of that, other than maybe Mega Starmie or Mega Frostlass, or, maybe Mega Lopunny, I don't think this card will see much play. But, it has seen play outside of Dark decks, so, I think this card will be useful, but I don't think it'll be a big meta impact. Then we come to a card that I've been eagerly awaiting, and that is Backtrack Badge. This is primarily for Mega Kang, but, it goes on to other colours Pokemon, but let's be real, what other deck is going to play it other than Kang? And this is going to go in A tier. Essentially, this lets you reflip a coin toss that you've done. So, for example, if you need a heads for your Kang, which is only a 50% chance, you can basically make it a 75% chance, which is pretty good, so that's pretty nice. And, if you're not happy with, flipping too many coins, or you want to BM your opponent, I guess, which I don't condone, but you can, I guess, you can use Backtrack Badge for that. So, it has its use. Then we have Tremendous Bomb, I believe this is called. This card, in theory, would be great, but there's a reason why it's ending up in D tier. Essentially, if you read the text of the card, a Mega Pokemon that hits into this card and does more than 240 damage, or equal to 240 damage, it would then put 12 damage counters on the attacking Mega. The issue is most Mega Pokemon will be doing, most of the ones that, can play around this card will be doing less than that. And Mega Lopunny does 230. So, not great in that regard, but I guess it does have some, somewhat use, but personally, I don't think this is a card that, we'll really see a lot. Then we have a new Dark Energy. I believe this is Shadowy Energy. And essentially, it gives the Terror protection, in a way, to, to your Dark Pokemon that it's attached to. Again, why would we need this? Outside of Zoroark, maybe, which might want to play it if it's feeling a bit bummy about certain archetypes. I don't think this card's going to see much play, and it's a pretty poor card. If we had, I think it's Hiding Energy, which gave full free retreat to any Dark Pokemon. Definitely being a S tier card, but outside of that, not really. And finally, we have Voltaic Lightning Energy, which I'm going to put in A tier. This gives a huge buff to a lot of the Lightning decks in the format. Mega Manectric now doesn't need a damage mod to take out a Mega Lucario, which is good to have. The Vikavolt can obviously do 280 on a single prizer, which is pretty good. The Manectric that we mentioned earlier about the barrier and stuff like that to evolution Pokemon, that can do a little bit more damage. And Tapu Koko, which can be seen in slot box decks, can now one-shot a Mega Starmie or Mega Greninja without needing any more bench space. So, it does have versatility, and I think this card will at least see some play. But anyway, that's going to be it for today for the Pitch Black card tier list. Obviously, I haven't talked about every card because, like I said, I'd be here all day. But these are the ones that I think will at least, have some degree of impact to some degree, or at least, see some degree of play, whether it's a locals, maybe a cheeky tournament. I mean, I highly doubt you're going to see more Pekka EX in a tournament, but you never know these days. People will try and make anything work. But honestly, I think this is a really, this is a really good set, and I don't think 30th Celebration set is going to be as good for players. It's more of a collector's set from what I've seen. But honestly, looking forward to playing some of these cards for videos, that's for sure. Anywho, I'm going to leave you a tip for today. I really hope you enjoyed seeing my Pitch Black card tier list, and I'll see you next time.